Welcome to lesson 2 of class, where we talk about creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality. And in this lesson is called Seeing is Believing. Now, it's one thing for me to tell you I'm a magician, or just like earlier, I can show you something that proves I'm a magician. So let's get into this. And first things first, if you remember lesson 1, we talked about perception and perspective. Now that we're going to go ahead and go a little bit deeper and build upon it, I strongly suggest, if you haven't been using it already, to go ahead and use something like ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, which has real-time access to the internet. But for this lesson, you won't need real-time access because, well, everything that I'm about to say is not only proven, but it's already existed for several hundreds of years. So let's get into this. Most of you have heard of things like, well, oh, well, that's a phrase, or that's ebonics, or this is philosophy. A lot of things are said in metaphor, but the truth is said in jest. And I always thought that was interesting because, well, when I was younger, I was very fascinated with psychology. And one of the things I learned about psychology and studying science is that the moon not only has an effect on the earth, but it has an effect on people. This is where you get the term lunatics from, or the song The Freaks Come Out at Night, so on and so forth, which is awesome and hilarious at the same time. But then I heard another phrase, and that phrase went like this: men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Never really understood that until I started getting into physics and science and everything else. And then I realized it makes perfect sense when you bring everything together and associate it. And what I mean by that is it takes Mars a longer time to go around the sun than Venus. Well, that's interesting. That means it takes a longer time for Mars to complete a year than Venus. That's weird. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Weird how men normally mature and it takes longer for them to mature than women. Women normally mature faster. So when you look at it from that perspective, with that perception, it starts to open your eyes a little bit more to somewhat of how this universe works, right? Now, I'm going to be dabbling in different areas because remember, we are talking about creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality. And I'm going to be bouncing between the different subjects in order to bring an understanding to everything. So let's go ahead and erase the board and get into this. So remember, this is lesson 2. We're building upon lesson 1. If you haven't seen lesson 1, I strongly agree and suggest that you watch lesson 1 because you might get lost in this lesson if you don't understand the point of view, perspective, perception, and everything else, and which I'm coming from. And then building upon it, it'll show you how to see things a little bit differently. In lesson 1, we tapped up on it, right? When I drew the curved line, and then of course you shifted the perspective you had or your point of view on things, and it built up from there. So let's talk about the universe and everything like that, and the earth and the body. A long time ago, and there's in different, writings and things like that, there's a saying. And I learned this saying when, well, I was getting into philosophy. And then years later, ironically, a couple months ago, actually, I heard this saying again, found out where it came from. And the saying goes like this, or the phrase: as within, so without, as above, so below, as the universe, so the soul. And when I was looking at this, I was very interested and intrigued because, well, to me, it made perfect sense. To others, it doesn't. So let's talk about it. Nobody understands and nobody knows who named the earth Earth, right? So we have. Now, if you've seen any of my videos or if you've been on social media, other people probably mentioned this, but what's interesting is if you take the H and move it to the front, it actually spells heart, right? Heart, give or take, yeah, earth, heart. We could do some spell checks later. But What's the correlation? Well, the model goes as within, so without, as above, so below, as the universe, so the soul. Interesting. The heart and the earth are two different things, but if you step back and you look at things with a certain perspective, with a right amount of perception, you'll start to see how the pieces connect. Let's take it a step further, shall we? The heart, it resides in the body. And in the body, there are 11 major systems. Anybody in the medical field, or if you have your Google out or your AI, you can search how many systems are there in the body, and you will actually get the answer, or you should get the answer, that there is 11 systems in the body, the human body, which is interesting because, well, as the universe, so the soul, and we're talking about the earth, well, how does the earth correlate to the heart? Well, the earth, which is taught in science class up until recently, but we won't talk about that. There are 7 continents, right? And then you have your oceans, right? And there are how many? That's right, class, 4, which gives you 11 systems all working in unison. Do you see the connection now? Right? Because you have your continents and then you have your oceans. The earth and the water work together, one feeds one another, etc., so on and so forth. The heart, with the 11 systems in the body, get it to function correctly. Excuse me. Get it to function correctly and help it maneuver throughout the environment. So I thought this was interesting, right? So, okay, all right. So as within, so without. Okay, let me think about this. Hold on. Took a deep breath in, so without. Well, there's air in my lungs. There's air in the earth. But did you know that there's oxygen and hydrogen in the universe? H2O, as the universe, soul, the soul. As above, so below. You can't breathe in space, but you can't breathe underwater neither. That's interesting. See, but then again, as within, so without. Well, I take a breath in and I exhale. What does that do? What does that mean? Well, what do plants do? Well, plants take in things like carbon dioxide and things like that and ingest them to utilize them during photosynthesis to go ahead and create food and energy for itself. And then it releases oxygen. We all work together, such as organisms do, in order to survive as a living entity. All right. So when you're thinking about all these things, think a little bit with more of a conscious ability, right? Because the same way you breathe, the tree breathes. But the thing is, the tree is breathing in what you exhale and giving you back what you put out, right? So it's a nice reciprocal in psychology, it's called reciprocal altruism, right? You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Psychologists will know this, but because I'm former military and I know some of the people digesting this are going to not have a PhD, I will refrain from using a lot of big words to make myself sound a certain way. However, in the military, we have a saying, we're going to break it down Barney style. So if you've ever seen Barney, hopefully I will make this as simple for you as possible. All right. So now we understand kind of, sort of, how the earth and the heart are kind of not only related, but how we are a living reflection of our own universe, right? Now let's take it a step further because I know some of you are like, oh, that's a cool math trick, so on and so forth, etc. Well, it only gets better. It only gets better. So if you ever heard of Nikola Tesla, he mentioned something and he said, if you understand the power of 3, 6, and 9, you will understand and unlock the keys to the universe. Well, let's see. Now, if you know nothing about 3, 6, and 9, it's a vibration. It talks about, physics. it's a long story, but I strongly suggest look up the significance of 3, 6, and 9 on your AI or on Google. You can put Tesla with it and everything might come together as far as a search query for answers. Now, if you're looking at the universe, well, the third planet from the sun is, well, Earth, right? Well, what's the sixth planet? Well, that's Saturn. And then the ninth planet is Pluto. So this gives you the ESP type of thing, right? Or initials. But let's go a step further, right? Because, oh, this is going to be so good. When you're talking about the universe, when you're talking about life, essence in whole, right? You have to look at this and say, wow, this looks somewhat interesting, but I don't get it. Okay, so I don't get it. That's fine. If you haven't researched or looked up or seen some of my videos, I did a video where I talked about the Fibonacci sequence. And so there is actually a range of numbers in the Fibonacci sequence that add up to 3, 6, and 9. And relative to human development, it also correlates to your age bracket, in which from when you start school around the age of 5 and then continue, so on and so forth, till about 144. So once you add the sum up, it will come out to, well, 3, 6, 9, so on and so forth. You'll understand once you do it yourself. However, I will tell you right now, AI can't see that. So please, by all means, don't try to use it. It's going to come up with a wrong answer. I even had to baby step it in an arithmetic problem, and it's supposed to be sophisticated. So now that we understand 369 and how it correlates to the planets and things like that, let's go a step further. All right. So in science, everybody has seen or heard of this formula here. And this formula is E equals MC squared, right? E equals MC squared. Now, E equals MC squared was developed by Albert Einstein. If you don't know who Albert Einstein is, he is a famous physicist as well as scientist and genius on many levels and many accounts. And I'll show you why in a second, especially with this theory of special relativity in the formula. So being that I correlated numbers to, the planets 3, 6, 9, so on and so forth by position, well, what if we did that to the alphabet? Well, guess what? There is actually a system out there where it correlates numerical value to letters in the alphabet. So 1 would be A, 2 would be B, so on and so forth. So if I were to break this down for people that didn't quite understand physics, but they would understand numbers or something to try to communicate to them, because you have to understand everybody has their own language, and because many people don't study all these topics or subjects. Some specialize in creativity. These are your artists, your singers, your rappers, who I call aggressive poets. And then, of course, you have your logical people. These are the very scientific, analytical people. I need something tangible. I need it to be proven. I need something. Then you have your art side, which creates and has logic and has the ability to tell you the value in which the art brings, right? So your artist will create. Then you have your logical people that says, that looks good. Then you have the artists that want to do something more meaningful, but they don't have a way to make money from it, so on and so forth, but they could tell a great story. And once they get good enough, they can go ahead and then sell their art because they've learned how to use creativity with logic with their storytelling. From there, they have to prove certain things. And that's where science comes in, right? Because the only thing science really does, along with logic and a couple other things, is to test the validity or how valid something is. So if I were to say 1 plus 1 equals 2, mathematicians would say, yes, that is correct. If I said force times speed or weight times speed equals the amount of force of impact, i.e. a car, when you're calculating how fast a car goes and if the airbags are efficient enough to stop, the passengers, that's something that's taken into a factor. So when I was looking at E equals mc squared, I said, okay, well, m is the 13th letter of the alphabet. C is, well, 3. And then, of course, we have 2 squared. Now, to break this down and make it even simpler, in not only certain areas, mathematics, physics, computing, etc., there's something called a digital root where you simplify stuff, right? And it goes with addition. So the highest number can be 9. The lowest number obviously will be 1. So 13 will become 4. 3 will stay as is. This is now 12. 12 squared is 144. 144 added up, because you're adding everything up to one digit, will come out to the number 9, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you want to go ahead and, argue, well, that doesn't make sense because that's not how you do mathematics. If you were to take 13 times 3 and then get an answer after you square it and then simplify it down to a single number using the digital root, you will also get the number 9, which is awesome. All right. So why am I saying this? Well, a lot of people don't understand that our universe and our world not only works on both words and energy, but mathematics and certain simple principles and ideologies that you've understood your whole life. You just haven't been able to see it. So hence lesson 2. So let's go further. Now that we have E equals mc squared and we have, the understanding that E equals mc squared can have a numerical value attached to the numbers, right? That's one thing. It's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting, etc. But here's even more spice for some of you. When Albert Einstein created this theory of special relativity, E equals mc squared, he passed away before they made more discoveries. See, mass is how much matter something has. Now, if you're looking at the correlation between the earth and the body, well, aren't we already a mass that's filled with everything that already matters, such as the earth, which keeps us alive as long as we take care of it? It's one of those things, right? One of those things. So I was looking at this and I said, mass is about matter. Matter comes with atoms. Atoms are made out of quarks. Quarks is essentially light. And those of you who want to argue, we can get into that later. But yes, I do know electrons are involved. And then, of course, when quarks radiate or vibrate because of the vibration, they emit photons. So we're not going to talk about mass right now. What I wanted to talk about was light, right? Because E equals mc squared is talking about a mass times the speed of light squared. But what makes this very interesting, and this is where we're going to start building on lesson 1, so get ready with your perceptions and your perspectives, because we're going to start looking at things differently. So we have E equals mc squared. I have notes here. That's why you see me looking down, because I'm going kind of in depth, but I had to make this simple so that a maximum number of people can understand this. So in essence, if we get rid of mass, right? Because essentially this comes down to physics, mass, or how much something weighs, or the matter inside of it, right? You are a mass. So your weight and then times the speed of light. I don't want to refer to anybody or you or mass right now. So let's talk about speed of light, right? And E. So E equals c squared. Now, this is where my creative side comes out and my artistic ability comes out, building upon lesson 1. When we look at E equals c squared, we would think, well, that's E times, C times C. So E equals C times C. That's weird. Do you see what I see? Let's go a step further. What if we applied lesson 1 to lesson 2 when referring to energy? right? Let's shift our perspective using the curved line. Now we take E equals C times C inverted. Do you see what I see now? Right? Because if I were to move this any closer, right, what you're seeing is probably what you saw in, well, lesson 1, right? Because, well, it's C times C, right? However, the speed of light times the speed of light, you're just doubling something. And if I'm talking about the Earth and the universe, well, the only way for me to see something is for it to allow me to see it, which includes light. So energy equaling C times C is funny because it also proves the fact that energy can neither be broken down, created, nor destroyed. And that is where you would get this nice infinity symbol. Now, would you look at that? Einstein hid it in plain sight. I don't think anybody's ever really focused enough to see what it was that he was saying, because all I have to do is take my fingers, draw a line, and now you have your C times C. So that's your C times C squared. Bravo. Yes, I know. It's great. However, what does this all mean? How does it relate back to what I was saying? Well, I've been trying to tell you, and I guess you're about to figure it out now, because we're going to move on to mass, right? The letter M, because I have a lot of friends who are in the scientific community and they're like, what is going on? I don't understand this. He's just some type of artist or lunatic that is drawing on a board thinking that he's educating people. Well, in essence, I kind of am. If you have enough backing to understand where I'm coming from, you'll understand this quote, and it comes from Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon once said to a gentleman that went to Harvard, the same $400,000 education that you just blew, you could have got for $1.50 with a library card. Now we have the internet, now we have AI, and now people could really start learning. So let's get back into it. So mass. What is mass? Mass, well, is anything that contains matter. Well, anything that contains matter has atoms. Well, that's weird because I want to recap something real quick. Remember we had the word earth? What if the word earth was an acronym? What if it was meant to simplify something that your brain couldn't comprehend? What if we used creativity and looked at the word earth and applied a word to each letter? Maybe it would stand for every atom resides together here. Well, where's here? Here is earth. Tierra, right? That's where you get it from. The dirt, right? Or the Latin phrase, terra, as you want to say it. But then what is heart, right? You know, over time, no matter what teaching you believe in, people say you should always take care of each other, just like the relationship between these two things. Well, if every atom resides together here, well, what if heart stands for help every atom realize they are here? Do you not understand that? Can you not see that? Let's go a step further, because I know my creativity might be playing upon some of you, and you're saying, no, this doesn't fully make sense. Can you explain it? And of course I can, of course. Why? Because this is something I spent most of my life studying. So it's a pleasure for me to finally share it with everyone. So I'm going to get very elementary. I want you to use your perception and your perspective to see what I see, applying what we learned from lesson one. This is going to be a little bit more difficult, but like an IQ test, we're going to test your creativity, not your memory. I'll leave that to your colleges and your schools. Right. Oh, hold on. Got to dry the board real quick. It's still a little wet, and I don't think you guys could see this. So let's make sure this is nice and dry. Perfect. All right. So we have A, well, the letter A. And then we have B, C, D, and then E, right? And then we have, well, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now, if I were to ask you, what do you see right now on the board? Just using what you know, a lot of you, like the curved line earlier, would say one or two things. Some of you who are clever would probably come up with a couple other things to say. Hold on. Well, some and majority of you will say, well, this is the alphabet to the English language. Now, granted, most of you are just focusing on the whole thing instead of understanding what it's trying to tell you and what's been hidden in plain sight this whole time. And what I think is hilarious, especially being a magician for over 20 years, now 21, is that if you want to hide something, you hide it in plain sight. So when I'm talking about mass, I am referring to not the beginning, but the end of the alphabet. So, as you recall, the end of the alphabet that I had on the board was, well, it was V, W, X, Y, and Z. And so, does this look familiar to you? Because it should. See, because a lot of people don't understand where V comes from. Well, if we break down E equals MC squared, it would look like this, because a lot of people don't know that the letter V was actually used to represent the speed of light. This was by James Clerk Maxwell back in 1865, before it changed to the letter C. So if I was going to write this, it would just be the equation backwards, which would be the speed of light, V, times W, X, Y, and Z. Now, I don't know if you guys see what I see going this far, but let me make it simpler. We have V, which is the speed of light. This was back in 1865, now known as the letter C. So I'm just going back in time and showing you stuff with the alphabet. So V is the speed of light. Then we have W, X, Y, Z. This doesn't look as clear as it should to some of you, but it's about to get a lot clearer. And so if we now get rid of the V, because remember, I said that I didn't want to focus on the speed of light. We did that already. Let's talk about mass. You're probably questioning yourself and saying, where's he going with this? Well, we're going to take W, X, Y, and Z and look at it like a creative equation. Okay? So right now we have W, X, Y, Z. Doesn't say much right now, but if I were to come here and now separate these, keep the X and the Y, now you have a Z, and now we solve like a math problem with some creativity. We have x, 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 y, z. And I'm going to just put an equal sign here. Now, remember, I said we were talking about mass, and if you studied science, you would know that the X and X chromosome is for females, and the X and Y chromosome is for males, talking about and referring to mass. The letter W, which is used to say, I don't know, the word woman, also, when broken up and the letters are crossed, create the X and X chromosome, which I think is hilarious. But it gets even better, ladies and gentlemen, because one of the things that happens when people get together, right, they start to realize some stuff. And there's things that some people understand and some people don't. The first thing I want you guys to understand is that there is something that is the most valuable commodity known to man. And now we're going to look at Z. Because if we look at Z, and I cross this, well, now that looks familiar because it was in lesson 1. That also looks like, well, it kind of looks like the number 8. But if I were to draw lines on the side, fill this in here, it could look like a hourglass. If I keep going and realize something, I say, oh, wait, hold on. Let me blow up the picture for you so you guys understand. So remember, we had W, X, Y, Z. The W, when we separated the lines and crossed them, that was the X and X chromosome for females. Then we had the XY for males. And then we had the Z. That's all I'm going to draw here. So we have your X and X, right? Then you have your XY equals, well, it started off Z, right? But then I talked about time. That's when I put the strike through it, right? Now, what's interesting is that if I were to put a line through the middle and get rid of this bottom one and this top one right here, make this a little bit bigger, you would see a very familiar symbol, a star, but then you would also see a couple things, right? Because this right here, right, the vertical angle, and I'll make it bigger here. So you have 1, and then of course I have the line going across, and then you have the other one, right? Well, this is the symbol for female and male, which I think is interesting because you have your X and your Y chromosome. Z, with some creativity, now demonstrates and shows that the female and male option is there. Well, what happens when two individuals get together and conceive? Well, they bring a life into this world that's either male or female based upon their chromosomes, not their ideology. So I'm not trying to say this to offend anybody. It's just if somebody were to take your DNA, they could kind of tell if you have an X and X or an X and Y chromosome. Now, I want to go a step further because there's more hidden symbols here when we look at this. Because if we go back to that hourglass figure, which we had with the letter Z that we saw earlier, right? This whole hourglass figure, well, that's one triangle, right? That's one triangle. Weird. And this is another triangle. Well, that's a 6-pointed Star of David, if I don't recall my teachings correctly. I mean, I recall history and what I've been taught in school, and I'm pretty sure if I were to Google Star of David, excuse me, I would get something that looked like this. But that came from here. Huh. If I go a step further and I get rid of this, right? Because, well, that's the Star of David, but what does that have to do with anything? And then, of course, that example that we had here, I mean, what does this have to do with anything? Well, that's weird because let's apply lesson 1 and shift it real quick. If we shift it, you have a symbol that looks like this. And anybody who's seen an ambulance knows this symbol because it's on every ambulance. Crazy how that works. It's also on your phone. It's the star symbol on your phone. If you look at a keyboard, it should be around the number 8. You know it as an asterisk. However, it also means to multiply. And what happens when a female and a male get together? They multiply into either offspring, yes or no, which is male or female. It's very interesting and fascinating stuff. But let's go even further because, well, yeah, that's great and all, and I could kind of see it, but, well, you know, all those things, that jibber jabber stuff, well, you know what's interesting is that was the ambulance symbol, right? That's weird because the X and X chromosome, then you have the X and Y. Well, that comes and that creates new life. Who studies that? We had the ambulance. I know. So if we had, let's say, a strand of DNA, maybe, possibly, right? A strand of DNA. It looks something like this. What if that looks familiar? Well, that's the medical symbol. How did the medical symbol get involved? Well, it was built on a strand of DNA, and they do study both men and women, and they do, well, look at childbirth and labor and things like that. They are in the medical community. And I can tell you right now, I've spoken to many doctors, and a lot of them don't even know where this symbol comes from. That's a problem. But it's okay because in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you come from. If you don't know where you come from, well, then you're kind of screwed on when it comes to knowing where you're going, don't you think? So as we move forward, I want you to think about that, right? Because, well, who studies and uses this, right? Oh, wait, no, let me get it. Who studies men, women, DNA, etc., right? I'm pretty sure you guys could figure this out. Since this is educational purposes, I will leave what the acronym means, but I'll let you go ahead and, type into AI, medical, who is who, or whatever, capital letters. You'll figure it out. So I wanted to get a little bit further into this because, there's a lot of things that are, well, quite upsetting, right? Because yes, these people are medical professionals. Yes, they took, well, excuse my language, an oath, right? To protect, heal, etc., blah, blah, blah. Well, they're probably asking some questions right about now since I just drew their symbol, and they're trying to wonder, well, where is he going with this? Well, let's apply mathematics to it now because it can't just make sense with some letters. It has to add up mathematically for the logical and scientific people and those who have some questions. So X and X, right? We have X, which is essentially X squared, right? X is the 24th letter of the alphabet. X squared, 24, gives you 576. Simplified goes to 9. XY, for those of you who don't know or can't see it, you have the, X and Y, you will have your X, Y, that is 24 and 25, giving you 600. When simplified, gives you 6. Now riddle me this. And I think it's funny. But this has a lot of meanings, right? Because some of you watching this may say, hey, says 69. And it's funny because, well, that's what people enjoy when they're in relationship. Now, the funny and interesting thing is, well, if I'm looking at the universe, and since we're talking about medicine and everything else under the sun, what happens if we put these things together? Not just mathematically, but what if we put them together? So we had the 6, right? But then we also had the 9. Huh. Well, 6 and 9, when you put them together, makes the zodiac sign for Cancer, which has been around since I think the Egyptian days. Yet nobody's really found a cure for it in the medical field. But when unknown things happen and are going to affect them, they magically come up with an idea of how to solve it. So I thought it was interesting because I said a joke randomly one day, and I said, people are going to start understanding what star 6-9 means. Well, we already saw what the star was and where that comes from. That's the X and Y and the X and X chromosome, giving you the option to bring in male, female, etc. Right? So you literally have star 69. Now, with star 69, it's pretty funny. I don't know if you guys ever used star 69, but star 69 is like a redial number, right? It's when somebody calls you and hangs up, you can hit star 69 and it'll call them back. Or if a call drops, let's say somebody called you and said, hey, what's up? I just wanted to tell you a couple things, this, that, and the third. And let's just say their connection was lost. You can hit star 69 and it will call the number back if they called you. But what's interesting is that even if you were to add 6 and 9 together, right? Let's get rid of this. If you were to add 6 and 9 together, you would get, 6 plus 9, that's 15. And that comes out to 6, which I think is hilarious because we talked about earlier in the universe, we have the 6th planet, which is Saturn. Most people will hear Saturn, so on and so forth. They'll call it Lord of the Rings or whatever the case. It kind of looks like this. If you study philosophy, if you know Greek lettering, you will also see a symbol that looks like this called phi. And that's cool and all. But now if we're starting to tie everything together and we were to say as within so without, right? Well, that's your inhale exhale from my understanding. As within so without. Now how does it correlate? Well, what I'm expelling and getting rid of, or as they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. What I'm getting rid of, plants use to help them create food. So it's actually their treasure. And what they expel comes back to you, and that is your treasure, right? Now, when it comes to this, you may see the Saturn, the 6, the philosophy symbol and things like that and say, that's great and all, but okay, so just to recap, we have 69. 9 is what adds up from females. The 6 is what comes from males, depending on how you look at it. Because if you look invertedly, a 6 can easily look like a 9. So we have to understand that. And then, of course, the star symbol, which is everywhere, that just talks about multiplication of the 2, right? So, what is it that keeps everything together? Well, let's go back to C, right? The speed of light, right? Because now we understand M, right? M would be mass. Mass comes from opposites attracting, as they say. So with opposites attracting, which creates mass, it's interesting because even on a quantum level with quarks and things like that, they always come in pairs. Sometimes they even come with groups larger, so on and so forth, right? And it's very interesting because you could be in a movie theater, for instance, and it's natural for people to gravitate towards one another because it increases their chances of survival. But even if you have a strong demeanor or a strong, secure presence, I guarantee you, you can sit in the middle of an empty movie theater, and when people start to come in, they're going to come and sit by you. And the first reaction you're going to have is, why in the world are they? You have this whole movie theater. Why are you sitting next to me? Well, because it increases the chances of survival, which atoms do in general, right? And then, of course, it also creates a field of safety, right? Which, when the atoms come together to create a more solid matter and they figure out exactly how to survive, they can create a harder exterior. You can experience this when you go to a gym and you lift weights, you get calluses, right? Because your skin develops and gets harder and learns to survive. So now that we understand mass, right? As so the universe, so the soul. Well, the universe, and a lot of people understand mathematics. I mean, a lot of people think we're living in a simulation, for crying out loud. However, if we were to break things down mathematically so that we could speak to, well, not just English speakers, because, well, math is known all around the world. Numbers are numbers. Letters are different. Numbers are numbers. So if we were to look at the speed of light in meters, right? This would be something like 299,792,000 something, right? When you simplify it, right, you're looking for the digital root, right? That gives you the number 1. Well, saying, okay, it gives you the number 1. Cool. If we measure in kilometers, that gives you the number, well, 3. Okay. Nothing yet. Okay. Let's do miles, right? Well, that gives you 9. Interesting, right? Because if I'm looking at all this, I say, well, how does this correlate? Well, remember when we were talking about the planets? Remember when we were talking about everything? We have 9 planets in the solar system. Well, we're the 3rd rock from the sun, right? And I think we only have 1 of those. If we were to add all these up, right? So we have 1, 3, and 9. Let's make some space here. No pun intended, right? I'll make some space here. And I look at this and I say, all right, if this is talking about the universe and I'm using 3 different measurements from around the world and I'm trying to speak to different people in a way that they can see it and they can't argue it, because mathematics is very hard to argue, especially if you don't like it. Trust me. The ones who love it will look at this and just start laughing. But if we were to take 9 plus 3 plus 1, what do we get? We get 13. Well, 13 simplified is 4. Huh. You know, if I was crazy, I would say 4 correlates to a lot of things, not only in the universe, but in different categories. And you know what? It just so happens that I have a couple areas in which the number 4 holds significance. So let's talk about the number 4, right? So in East Asia, places like China, Korea, the number 4 is actually associated with bad luck because it sounds similar to the word for death in their respective languages. In numerology, The number 4 is often associated with stability, security, and practicality. And if you're a 22 master builder architect, it's just a 4 amplified. Remember, you're looking for the digital root. In certain cultures, right, it stands for the 4 elements. That's earth, air, fire, water. It also can represent, well, the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. Oh, that's weird. As above, so below. But if I turn sideways to take a breath, my air comes in and out. So north, south, east, and west. Okay, I got it. Now, we also have 4 seasons. You have to understand that, right? And then for you spiritual people that like to play with tarot, the number 4 is also associated with the Emperor card. I'll let you guys look into that. But then I wanted to see for the mathematicians out there. Well, obviously, 4 deals with properties of squares and cubes, right? In algebra, the number 4 even comes into play. But here's the best part. In physics, the number 4 is significant in various contexts. For instance, the 4 fundamental forces of nature, which are gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. Additionally, this is where we come back full circle now, in special relativity, space-time is described by 4 dimensional continuums consisting of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal. Interesting. Now, I know earlier I drew the medical symbol on there, and for those of you who do not know, that's the staff of Hermes, by the way. Yes, the Greek messenger god, also known as Mercury, so on and so forth, for those of you who studied Roman gods and things like that. But getting back to the medical community, the interesting part is about the number 4 is it also shows the 4 vital signs traditionally in medicine, which recognizes the primary vital signs such as body temperature, pulse rate, respiratory rate, and blood pressure. These are the things that medical professionals use to get informed about a person's physiological state and help them understand and assess overall health. And then, of course, best part, we have 4 blood types. We have A, we have AB, we have B, and then we have O. The ABO blood group system plays a crucial role in blood transfusions, organ transplants, and paternity testing. Interesting. We're coming back full circle. Remember I talked about X and Y and XX and then creating life, DNA, etc. Interesting. The number 4 ties into all of this. And then, of course, you have the 4 stages of healing, which would consist of, well, things like hematosis, blood clotting, in other words, inflammation, proliferation. So this would be your tissue growth and repair. And then you have your remodeling, which would be the new tissues that are being developed. Now, for the icing on the cake, because, well, there are things out there that you can't see. And that brings us to, well, psychology, my favorite. So in ancient Greek and Rome philosophy, Hippocrates, excuse me, I'm horrible with his name, but Galen proposed the theory of the 4 temperaments, categorize personality types into 4 primary categories. Now, if you don't know who the person Hippocrates is, and I'm probably butchering his name, it's where the Hippocratic oath comes from that medical professionals have to take if they're going to handle someone's life with care. But I think, that promise and those oaths, we need to take a good look at them, because it's very interesting. When I look at this, I say, the 4 cognitive functions that, well, this was by, hold on, in certain psychological theories, such as Carl Jung, one of the most respected people in the field, His theory of personality cognition is often described in terms of four primary functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. Ironically, when I square four, I get Myers-Briggs 16 personality types. I guess the answer really is 42, depending how you look at it. And then, of course, lastly, we have the four stages of cognitive development. And that would consist of, well, ages between birth and the age of 2. Then we have 2 to 7. Then we have some concrete operational years. That's your 7 to 11, no pun intended. And then, of course, your formal operational years. This is from ages 11 on upward. And this would maybe bring you around 7th, 8th grade before you get into high school and you start trying to figure out what you want to do with your life and start dreaming once again. But one of the things I always realized is, with all this and laughing at Star 6 9 and looking at everything we saw here, when children get in trouble, they normally call their parents. Their parents could call them, they could tell them the stove is hot, but until they touch the stove, they won't find out. And then when they do touch the stove and find out that it's hot, then they go running to mommy and daddy, so on and so forth, and say, "It burnt my hand. I need you to fix it." So I think it's funny Star 6 9 represents, well, in essence, a mother and father who created a child that, well, maybe possibly said, "Hey, I might need to call you back someday. So can we figure this out?" And then some genius decided to program Star 69 into everyone's phone so that if anybody called them and the call dropped, they can go ahead and hit it and hit redial so that they can speak to them and be connected once again. I don't know about you guys, but this has been a lot for me. And I'm very excited for lesson 3 because, well, I will be going in more depth in future lessons, but I will be having a private group that will be starting soon because, well, on here I can only talk but for so much and teach for so much. But the real juice out of life comes with the interactions between two individuals. And any psychologist or any medical professional will tell you that your life expectancy, one of the factors is the amount of connections that you have in your life. So one of the things that I will strongly and urge you to do is to connect with one another, have hard conversations, look at things differently. Don't just rely on your perception to give a perspective to the world you know nothing about because you never really investigated it for yourself. Take the leap, take the first step, go on the adventure and see what the hell is out there, because at the end of the day, we're all gone. And you know what? People don't realize this, but everything in this universe is utilized one way, shape, form, or another. Even myself and you are very powerful beings, but some of you don't even realize it until you get in your car and you burn your fossil fuels. And what are fossil fuels but the decay of the dead? Interesting food for thought. Remember this, and I got this from the movie Coach Carter. It's not our darkness that most frightens us. It is our light. But now I'm going to combine it, right? Because in there, it says something pretty philosophical, but I wanted to connect with people in this video. So if you've ever seen Brene Brown and she talks about vulnerability, your light is that moment in which you are vulnerable with somebody and you're able to show yourself for truly who you are. And when you do that, unconsciously, you give other people and those who look up to you, if you're a leader yourself, the ability to shine themselves. And one of the people, and there's many in my life, but for this lesson, and I hope one day he gets to see this, there was a mentor I looked up to in magic. His name was Darren Brown, and he did something during a performance of his. And this is my homage to him for lesson 2. And if anybody gets to see this, I really want you guys to understand this and always remember this. And this has been the whole premise of the whole video, because we did talk about E equals MC squared. We talked about the X and X, X and Y, how it's hidden in the alphabet. But one thing I want you guys to remember, and remember it well, and it's been here the whole time since the beginning of the lesson, is that it takes two to see, but only one can judge. Thank you so much. This has been lesson 2. I am looking forward to seeing the rest of you in lesson 3. And that is where we go into the title, Seeing in Between. So till next time, my friends, take care, have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed class.